Thank you very much. I'm very touched by what's the kindest and most generous introduction that I have ever received. And of course, I am touched by Miriam, who brings back a flood of memories to me about days gone by, which I do not usually recall anymore, not because they still aren't part of my life, but because of the fact that my life has gone on. First, let me say that it doesn't take a lot of talent to get shot down. I was able to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane, which was Robert Strange McNamara's way of winning the Vietnam War, as many of you may know. Barry Goldwater was my campaign chairman in 1986, and the night before the election, he got a little nostalgic, and he said, "You know, John," he said, "if I'd have been elected president in 1964 and beaten Lyndon Johnson, you'd have never spent all those years in a Vietnamese prison camp." And I said, "You're right, Barry, it would have been a Chinese prison camp." And he was not amused by that. I had intended tonight to talk to you about Jerusalem and how honored I am by the National Council of Young Israel for this award, and indeed I am. And I know that you know of our shared commitment concerning Jerusalem, concerning all of the issues that so many of us have been involved in for so many years. But I must say I'm very touched by the introduction, and I'd like to say to Miriam to start with that none of us will ever forget Zach, and we will never end our efforts for his return, because that's the least we can do. And the sign of a great nation, the sign of a great nation that separates Israel and the United States from many other nations, is our commitment to those we send to serve and sacrifice. And if we forget them, then we really betray the fundamental principles that were the foundations of our respective nations. And Zach is important to you as a mother. Zach is important to all, Ron and the others are important to all of us as a symbol of great nation that cares and loves and cherishes its young people. And the thing that astonishes our adversaries, they can never understand it. The Vietnamese could never understand it. The Palestinians will never understand it. Why we have this commitment, for whom and for which we are willing to make enormous sacrifices, far in excess of any rational or objective view of what's to be obtained. And so I'm very touched. I'm very grateful. I'd like to sort of close by telling you a story that took place when I was in Vietnam. As I said, I don't recall it. My experiences there very much, and I don't talk about it very much because I think my duties as a senator call me to other things. But when I think about Zach sitting somewhere in some cell, having been deprived of our most precious treasure, our freedom, I think about an experience that I had in my last year in prison in Vietnam. Because I know that Zach is thinking and doing exactly what we did in Hanoi, as all young patriots do. The last year or so that we were in prison, the Vietnamese changed our treatment from very harsh, very difficult situation where many of us were kept in solitary confinement or 2 or 3 to a cell, to putting us in rooms with about 25 or 30 or even more prisoners in each cell, and they basically started to leave us alone. This wasn't because the Vietnamese all of a sudden became nice people. But the object lesson here is, and the reason why our efforts on behalf of the Israeli POWs are the same, is the Vietnamese finally got the message that Americans cared and they wanted us to be treated in a humane fashion. Well, as part of this change in treatment, I got to know a young man whose name was Mike Christian. Mike Christian came from a small town He came from a very poor family. He enlisted in the United States Navy when he was 17 years old. He later became an officer and then was shot down and captured in 1967, about the same time I was. As I say, he came from a very poor family. He had a keen appreciation of the opportunities that America gives us. As part of our change in treatment, the Vietnamese allowed us some packages, or some of us some packages, with small articles of clothing in them. The uniform that we wore in prison was a blue shirt, blue trousers, shoes that were cut out of automobile tires. I recommend them highly. One pair lasted me for 5.5 years. And Mike Christian was able to get a hold of a piece of white cloth and a red handkerchief and fashioned himself a bamboo needle. And over a period of a couple of months, he sewed on the inside of his shirt the American flag. Every evening before we would have our bowl of soup of undetermined content, we would put Mike Christian's shirt with the flag sewn on it on the wall of the cell and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I will freely admit to you in most of our activities saying our allegiance to the United States of America or to the State of Israel is not the most important part of our day. For us in that prison cell, a couple of whom had already been in prison for 7 years, it was indeed the most important and meaningful part of our day. One day the Vietnamese came into our cell, searched our cell as they did periodically, and they found the shirt with Mike Christian's with the flag sewn inside of it. They removed it. They came back that evening and opened the door of the cell and called for Mike Christian to come out. He went out, they closed the door of the cell, and right outside the cell, for the benefit of all of us, beat him for a couple hours rather severely, opened the cell and threw him back in. The cell in which we lived was a large, fairly large room with a concrete slab in the center of it that we slept on, and 4 light bulbs, one in each corner, that shone 24 hours a day. We cleaned Mike up as well as we could. He was pretty badly banged up, and I went over to lie down on the slab to go to sleep. And as I did, I looked over in the corner of the cell underneath the light bulb with a piece of white cloth and a piece of red cloth and another shirt was my friend Mike Christian, with his eyes almost shut, sewing another American flag. He wasn't doing that because it made Mike feel better. He was doing that because he knew how important it was for all of us. So as we enjoy this wonderful nation, both nations, then I think it's well to remember there are people like Zach and Mike Christian and Ron and so many others who have made it possible for us to have the freedom and opportunity that we do, and we will cherish them always. Thank you very much. I'm very honored.